the crisscrossing and the relations are there. I mean, this isn't. I mean, this can be empirically demonstrated. We can go back to Blyden. We can go back before. The ways in which these kinds of ideas intersect with early nationalist leaders in West Africa, in East Africa, and so or the ways in which this is an interesting thing on the ways in which. If you look at and this is not necessarily seen as a kind of diasporic connection, but a really important way in which these communities were knitted together was through the Tuskegee model. And this model is replicated in West Africa and Southern Africa. You find it in various parts of the continent. Now, it may not necessarily be something that was presented, by, kind of thinkers, who felt that this is the way that it should, who wanted to, knit black people together in this way, but it constituted a way in which they were knit together. Or with respect to, for example, Zionist churches as they break out in West Africa, Southern Africa in particular. This whole conversation about, the imagination in the minds of leaders and their followers with respect to their relationship to black people on the other side of the Atlantic, and how they figure into some sort of kind of proto, cataclysmic struggle against, colonialism. Very, very interesting, And so, some of this is there. And then the other thing that you mentioned was music.
Yeah.
And, scholars do their thing, but musicians have been at this for a long, long time.
Yeah.
For a long, long time, comparing ideas, mixing and matching and collaborating and so forth and so on. And so these kinds of connections have been ongoing in different theaters. So yes, I do try to suggest ways of moving forward.
Okay.
Are we done? Can we take one more? This is hopefully not a hostile question, right? I don't know, but you're looking at me like, okay, here we go. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for the wonderful.
Yes. Well, thank you.
I so much.
I don't know. I think you're setting me up for something.
Yeah. First of all, I appreciate the fact that it ended on the note of a crisis of expectations, which puts me in a crisis of expecting more. So I wonder if we could speak more to the notion of the crisis of expectation. And the second is, I'm thinking about to frame this, but it seems to me that there is what I am imagining to be the context of agencies, which I think is part of the problems of the erasure of Africa in other spatial and historical imaginaries. And by that I mean that there seems to be this anxiety of, when we resituate Africa in certain contexts or in certain spaces, there's always this anxiety that the restitution of Africa always leads to the erasure of, perhaps the process of becoming of that space. So I think it's difficult to think through this context. How do you speak to that, this context of agencies in terms of thinking about global Africa?
It's a very good question, and it gets us, I think it's an appropriate final kind of point at which to end. And I do think that, and I try to kind of anticipate that very question in referencing the ways in which, kind of conventional ideas about Africa and diaspora they threaten each other. And how we need to try to move. We need to try to negotiate between these different, camps, if you will, to see how we can bridge and articulate. Because in my view, we don't necessarily need to be threatened by each other. Indeed, we are each other from our perspective. But epistemology emerges out of some context. We know this. We know the ways in which the social sciences come out of a particular period in time. We know how the notion of political economy was negotiated, abandoned, and has reemerged. We know how epistemology works in conjunction with temporalities. And I'm thinking that what I'm suggesting is that there are models which suggest ways in which we can rethink space and relations. The Annalise started this back in the Mediterranean. The Indian Ocean scholars have pushed this forward, okay? And, this suggests, that, a kind of terrestrially bound signification is not the only one to take into consideration. And that we can move through, sands we can move through seas of sand, seas of water, in the area in which I work, in the Sahel. The scholarship is really moving forward. If you look at Leiden's work, if you look at Shukiel Hamel's work and so forth, it's really been, and hopefully what I've tried to do moves us further in that direction where you see a collapsing of North and West Africa, such that the point is being made over and over again that just as we can't study West Africa or understand West Africa in the absence of North Africa, the reverse is also true. And so my suggestion is that we more carefully consider, the various kinds of transnational models that are coming up. And secondly, that in engaging with new formulations, that one of the reasons why people are intimidated and threatened is because they haven't done the work to appreciate the other dimension. All right, going back to the business of our Creole communities. One of the most important works on Creole communities was written by someone who knows nothing about Africa, right? Absolutely nothing about Africa, and we'll say that publicly. So what we need to do, therefore, is that people we need to educate ourselves, and move outside of our comfort spaces, and I think that would really facilitate a greater dialogue and interaction. And would help us to consider, other kinds of models, other ways of thinking about, the ways in which communities comport and don't comport. These are ways of thinking about things. There are other ways of thinking about things, and I don't mean to completely. I don't mean to say that the terrestrially bound perspective is wrong or in error. I am saying that there's capacity to place it in the conversation with other kinds of perspectives. So let's see where we go.
All right, please join me in thanking Professor Gomez for his provocations and encouragement for further dialogue. Thank you for joining us. I know we have to whisk you away.
Yes, we need to go.
But thank you.
I apologize that I can't stay, but by way of self-promotion, I have this book coming out in January that is on West Africa. It's not on diaspora, and bring me back.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. Good to see you. Okay, all right. Okay, all right.